It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another segment of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck. And of course, that means some Smart Talk Radio is in your future. In this segment, very pleased to have with us Steve Phillips. Is a national political leader. He's a civil rights lawyer as well and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. In 1992, Steve became the youngest person ever to hold public office in San Francisco and went on to serve as president of the Board of Education. He is also the co-founder of PowerPack.org, a social justice organization. Our conversation today centering around a brand new work by Steve called Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority. Steve, how are you, my friend?
Doing well, thank you.
You have been involved in the political scene for a long time, dating back to Jesse Jackson and others. I'm curious as to why now this particular book, and had you been motivated to write a book earlier, or this was the subject you'd been waiting for?
Well, I think this is the moment that I've been waiting for, in that we're at this pivotal point in terms of U.S. politics and really the country overall around what direction are we going to go in the post-Obama era. And I was quite alarmed to find that too many people in the progressive movement, the Democratic Party, failed to grasp and appreciate the significance of Obama's election, and that it represented a tipping point in terms of the country's politics because the composition of the country's racial electorate had changed. And that as a result of not understanding that, too many people are running campaigns are wasting hundreds of millions of dollars on ineffective and outdated strategies, and they're going to lose unless they run aggressively towards embracing the components of the Obama coalition and moving massive amounts of money into those communities in terms of hiring staff and mobilizing those voters.
Steve, I think I know the answer to this, but I will get your take on this. You're talking about the Democratic Party not recognizing some of these sort of just foundational shifts here. What about the Republican Party? I'm assuming you would say the same thing to them, because it would seem to me if they wanted to, they as well could take advantage, so to speak, of that or recognize that.
Right. Well, it's actually very interesting. I think the Republican Party is going through a bit of a civil war right now on which direction they're going to go in. But I have a chapter in the book called Conservatives Can Count. And in many ways, they actually get the implications of this transformation more than the Democrats do. And so they have a two-pronged strategy consisting of what I call suppression and then seduction. So a lot of the voter ID laws are, I feel, designed to create barriers to people voting, and then a seduction where they're actually elevating candidates of color and putting more resources behind them in many cases than the Democrats are doing.
Again, the Obama election, obviously an incredible moment, an important moment in American history. You feel that there's a chance that the progress that has been made and the doors that have been opened could slip back away again? Is that one of your concerns?
Well, that's absolutely what's at stake. I mean, the Republican candidates are unapologetic around their efforts to try to roll back all of the different gains of these past 8 years, from health care to marriage equality to equal pay for women and reproductive choice and immigration reform. And so that's very much at stake. And my concern is that the Democrats don't fully appreciate that the way to combat that is to go all in on the Obama coalition and stop trying to placate and persuade the voters in the middle.
As this sort of cultural and demographic shift has happened, what kinds of maybe strange bedfellows, or certainly bedfellows that would not have necessarily been aligned before, maybe politically, are now aligned in the year 2016 that haven't happened in the past?
Well, one of the interesting things in terms of how this is playing itself out is that there are elements of donors and forces who are on the conservative side who are seeing these shifts and are making some steps to be able to create different types of coalitions. We're seeing it particularly in the realm of criminal justice reform. Even the Koch brothers are entering into partnerships with progressive organizations and leaders, Newt Gingrich and these Smart on Crime, more conservative groupings partnering up with more traditional liberal organizations. So that's an example of the kinds of things that can come together from the sectors of the conservative movement. And it's a threat as well to the progressives and Democrats, because they have been able to rely upon the demonization steps of those on the right side of the spectrum. But to the extent that the conservatives are reaching out more, it's going to be even more imperative for the Democrats to draw clear distinctions around who sides with whom in terms of empowering the communities of color.
You just joined us. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio, talking to Steve Phillips. He's a civil rights attorney as well as a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. We're talking about a brand new work called Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution has created a new American majority. Steve, I do want to get back to the book, but I would also like to get your take during this conversation about you spent a lot of time in the throes of the civil rights movement, and I'd be very curious to get your opinion of, over the years, how has it changed, and what is the state, so to speak, of the civil rights movement? Do you feel it's healthy? Is it in trouble? Does it need new direction? Or give us your take on it again, based on February of 2016.
Well, I think there's a lot to be encouraged about, particularly in terms of the role and activism and engagement of young people. And you see it both in terms of the people driving the Black Lives Matter movement and trying to channel that anger around the killings of unarmed black, usually men, but even women as well as you see in the immigration reform movement, the Dreamers, these dream activists. So these conditions around America not being where we need to be in terms of justice and equality has spawned a whole new generation of activists across the spectrum who are engaging in creative tactics, committing their lives, bringing about efforts to move. And you saw that with the Black Lives Matter activists pushing the Democratic candidates to more embrace this movement. So that's all very encouraging. None of that work has the resources that it needs. And that's probably why I'm trying to argue that, particularly the Democrats are going to spend $3 billion this election cycle. 46% of their voters are people of color. They need to move millions of dollars into programs that are backed by and driven by these young leaders of color.
What about, Steve? What about the role of minorities, so to speak? But again, Brown being the new white in the cities themselves. As you referenced, there were issues in Baltimore and St. Louis and all the ones that are well documented. But what is the state of the American city right now?
Well, there's a lot of turmoil and as well as opportunity, and so we see it playing out in different ways, and it's tied to some of these more high-profile incidents of repression in terms of Steve Ferguson and in Charleston, these different killings, and there's been this uprisings in Baltimore. But at the same time, you also saw in Baltimore the election of Marilyn Mosby to the state attorney's office, who comes out of and is accountable to the community rather than just to the police, and was able to move forward and put the criminal justice apparatus behind actual justice in that situation by arresting the people who were responsible for killing Freddie Gray. So there's a lot of opportunity at the city level, and also because the voting universe is smaller, that the activists can even have a greater impact to take power within these cities and manifest the vision of the new American majority.
We jump back again to the book, again called Brown is the New White. As you look at these new coalitions and the new numbers, and the book is loaded with all kinds of very real demographic information. It's a fact book as much as it is anything else. But I'm curious as to how is it playing itself out in terms of candidates? Are the percentage of people of color, candidates of color, how are they increasing, and are they increasing more at the local level? What are we seeing out there in real life, so to speak?
Well, there are many candidates who are running. There's a lot of very inspiring, hopeful local leaders who are either in office at the local level or actually running for office across the demographic spectrum. And yet the challenge is that are really the powers that be and those who control and direct resources going to get behind these different types of folks. Maryland, for example, that when Donna Edwards put forward to run for the U.S. Senate, a body which has only had one African-American woman in it in the history of the United States, in one of the blackest states in the country, that this was a great opportunity to get another African-American woman in the Senate, Harry Reid came in and actually endorsed her white male opponent right out of the gate. And so that type of barrier, and you contrast that with what the Republicans did in South Carolina when they saw the demographic changes. They plucked Tim Scott, a first-term congressman, and said, African-American, we're going to put him in the Senate. So their candidates are there, the leadership is there, but the people at the top of the party and the progressive movement have to embrace and elevate those people.
Steve, again, when we talk about the different demographics and the different groups within this spectrum of color, whether it is Hispanic, Black, Native American, describe for our Lewis at Large listeners, if you would, from your perspective, as different political groups. What do they have in common? What kind of things would they be sharing and working together towards? And where do you see differences that might divide them from time to time?
Well, there's a lot of in common because all of them are trying to make America more multiracial and inclusive of the full diversity of the country. And that really, I think, is a lot of the central struggle within the country, and that's really what the core appeal of someone like Trump is. This whole Make America Great Again period, this again period that he's talking about, is a period the country was overwhelmingly white, and when it had little outreach to an embrace of people of color. So Latinos, Arab Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, African Americans are all trying to get this country's institutions to validate and embrace their own particular cultures. So that's the seminal struggle, and unfortunately there are progressive whites who are siding with those people. So that's what I call the new American majority. There are ultimately going to be, every group's history and dynamics are different, but in terms of the central point around, is this going to be a white country or is this going to be a multiracial country? That's what the debate is over right now.
Again, we're talking to Steve Phillips, civil rights attorney, senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, and also the co-founder of PowerPact.org, a social justice organization, brand new work called Brown is the New White. Steve, what about as these groups begin to really focus and see the power maybe that really lies with them? Do you see a lot of this sort of political revolution, so to speak, or these alignments? Do you feel most effective to start at the national level, or is this really more of a ground roots thing and they should start working at the local level?
I think it's a both-and situation in that a lot of the leaders can come from the local area, but a lot of the resources really move through the national campaigns, right? So Obama's campaign spent $1.1 billion. Hillary's on track for that, and Sanders is on track for something in that range. And so the question then becomes, with the campaigns that have that vast amount of resources, where are they going to move them, and who are they going to anoint and elevate? Right? I talk in the book about an Arab American organizer in Orange County who, with her knowledge of Arab and Muslim communities, was able to find the voters within Orange County, California, in ways that the white consultants who were running the campaign couldn't. They gave her a list of 5,000 voters. She went out and found 61,000 Arab American and Muslim voters. So people who have that kind of knowledge and expertise, are they going to be put in positions of leadership, hired by these campaigns who have the money to be able to put them on a career track to become the new political leaders within America?
That's kind of where I was headed next, and that is, again, you are well connected in political circles, and when you talk to the Clinton people, you talk to the Sanders people, and quite frankly, to those on the Republican side of the aisle that you talk to, those political operatives, what do they say to you when you share this information? Do they look at you funny, or they say go away, or do they say, wow, you're right?
Well, there's more. Increasingly, there is more rhetorical "you're right," but then is that followed by budgetary allocations, right? So I'm not just looking for verbal agreement. Actual commitment is what is within your budget. And so if 46% of the Democratic vote is people of color, which it is, then is half of your money going to hiring staff, hiring consultants, partnering with community organizations who come out of those communities, or are you spending most of your money on television ads chasing the shrinking sector of the electorate, that's the swing voters?
Steve, the other thing I was struck as we're having this conversation, again, no matter which news channel you're watching, they're showing you maps and they're saying this is the new South, or here's the results from this state, that state. How important is where the states are, or the geographic region rather, versus, again, based on what you're saying, these new demographic alignments? Because it would seem to me those would cross all kinds of state lines.
They do cross state lines, and I've got a series of maps in the book in Chapter 2 where I show where the different groupings, the different racial groupings, are concentrated geographically. People are concentrated where they're concentrated for historical reasons, right? Most of the Latinos are in the Southwest because much of the Southwest used to be Mexico until the Mexican-American War and Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. African Americans, the majority, still live in the South because that was where slavery was within this country. And so those are still the geographic areas where these communities live. But now that we've had the demographic growth, those areas that were formerly places of oppression and exploitation are areas of potential power and growth. I quote Reverend Jackson in one of my chapters saying, the hands that once picked cotton can now pick presidents. And that's the dynamic that's taking place in America.
What about what about the rhetoric that's coming? And if you want to focus on the Democratic side, that's fine. Are they talking with the right message? Are their messages on point to these emerging groups, or do you still think that they're talking around them or over them or to another audience and they're missing it?
Well, I think both parties are grappling with the challenge of their language and their rhetoric. And so on the Republican side, clearly Donald Trump is doubling down on white voters who are fearful about the country's changing demographics. Jeb Bush had wanted to actually make more inroads with Latinos in particular, but his campaign's obviously faltering. And so to be a question around which direction is Rubio going to go. He's trying to go all directions at once. And so that's going to be see how that plays itself out. On the Democratic side, they've made rhetorical progress in terms of talking about things like Black Lives Matter, institutional racism, but they have to match that with moving real money into efforts to engage those communities where there could be a major program to find, identify, train, and run candidates for district attorney. So you have more people like Marilyn Mosby from Baltimore and fewer like Tim McGinty from Cleveland, who was paralyzed in the face of a clearly unjust shooting.
Steve, again, sort of back on the political front, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, with this new demographic or these new groups emerging and some of these new alignments, can you make the case that it would be possible for a third-party candidate to, in fact, get these groups together, so to speak, and win a major election?
That's what people throw that idea out there. Somebody who came of age in the Rainbow Coalition and Jackson presidential campaigns and then saw that evolve to the election of Obama. In my opening chapter, I talk about the continuum from Martin Luther King to Jesse Jackson's 88 campaigns to Obama's 2008 election. My belief and hope and mission is that this new American majority, this multiracial new American majority, can and should take over the Democratic Party and should run the party in the interest of this emerging coalition. It's not yet there. That's why I had to write this book, and I'm trying to make this call to action to people to pull the party in this direction to embrace the trends that are going to shape our future.
Yeah, that again, within the party itself, within the bylaws, within the structure of the party, within just the whole psyche of the party, is it open to this, and are you seeing a lot of barriers being broken through now?
Well, I have not seen enough progress. I think there's too much continued old thinking that the way to win elections is to try to spend lots of money on television ads chasing the white swing voter. I have a chapter in the book called The Requiem for the White Swing Voter. But that's not driving enough of the national political thinking in terms of people in charge of the Democratic Party. And so that's why I really wanted to write this book as a wake-up call and a call to arms for activists across the country to really, I say, both help and harass the party to move in the direction that it needs to move to build on the Obama model of how to win in the new multiracial America.
Well, as we wind up here, this is going to air after the Super Bowl, so I will not ask you for that prediction, but I am curious as to think, who do you see as the nominee for each party, and how do you see it playing out?
I think it's a open question how it's going to unfold. On the Democratic side, unless Sanders is able to make significant, rapid progress among voters of color, he's got a very tough road to go forward on. I mean, Hillary Clinton has deeper relationships in this core part of the Democratic electorate, and that is going to be determining who wins the nomination. So it's not a closed door for Sanders, but he's far behind in terms of being able to put together the winning coalition on that side. And the Republican side is anybody's guess. I mean, it's a fascinating situation around because the direction is so starkly different. Are they going to, in a lot of ways, this is their last best chance to hold back the progress of this new American majority, or are they going to move more towards abandoning the demonization approach of people of color and actually try to embrace and make inroads? So Rubio kind of represents that potential. Trump obviously represents the other spectrum. And I am not a betting man who would try to predict that one.
I agree with you completely. The work is Brown is the New White, How the Demographic Revolution Has Created a New American Majority by Steve Phillips, again, a national political leader, and he is also, the co-founder of PowerPack.org. Steve, before we get out of here, tell us how people can find out more about some of the work that you have done and maybe pick up a copy of the book.
The book's available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and you can learn more about our overall work and stay in touch with this effort through our website, brownisthenewwhite.com.
All right. Listen, thank you so much. Best of luck, and would love to have you on again.
Thanks so much.
You bet. We'll be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.